Hi, I'm Julia. All my life, I've felt like a shadow, perpetually eclipsed by my brother Mike. My parents never disguised their disappointment in me, starting from the moment I came into the world. The circumstances of my birth nearly claimed my mother's life, and to add insult to injury, I was born with a defect that served as a constant reminder of that harrowing time. You shouldn't have been born, Julia. Look at what you did to your mother. My father's voice would echo through her home, twisted with a blend of anger and regret. My mother, on the other hand, barely acknowledged my existence unless it was to hold me up against Mike. Why can't you be more like your brother? He excels at everything without even trying, she would say, smoothing Mike's hair, her eyes sparkling with pride that never seemed to extend to me. Despite the lack of warmth at home, I found solace in the fleeting vacations spent with my grandparents. Their home was a sanctuary, overflowing with warmth and laughter, two things that were all too rare in my own life. "Julia, dear, come help me in the garden," my grandmother would call, her voice always soothing and inviting. Those simple moments of planting flowers or harvesting vegetables became my escape from the grim reality waiting for me back home. Why do your parents keep you locked up in that gloomy house all the time? You need sunlight, fresh air, and friends your age, my grandfather would often grumble after a few glasses of iced tea on the porch. I'd shrug my shoulders and reply, "I don't know, Grandpa. They say it's because I'm not strong enough or might get hurt." I tried to mask the pain his words unintentionally stirred within me. "But you're strong, Julia. Stronger than anyone I know," he insisted, squeezing my hand with a grip that belied his age. One summer, the chasm between my two worlds became unbearable. I watched Mike blow out the candles on yet another birthday cake, a celebration I wasn't invited to share. That night, a darkness settled over me as I whispered, "Why do I even exist if I'm such a burden?" The words felt heavy, like stones in my heart. Under the cover of night, I packed a small bag with my few treasures: a worn-out doll, a book of fairy tales, and a photo of my grandparents. Silent tears streamed down my face as I made my way to the only place I ever felt wanted. Knocking on my grandparents' door was the hardest thing I had ever done, but when they opened it, their concern transformed into determination. "Julia, whatever it is, we're here for you," my grandmother said, pulling me into a hug that felt like the safety I had yearned for my entire life. That night, as I lay in the guest room, listening to the comforting sounds of the house, I realized a decision had to be made. I could no longer live in the shadows, neglected and unloved. It was time to fight for the life I deserved, surrounded by the only people who had ever shown me what it meant to be loved. "Julia, it's high time you started school like other kids your age," my grandmother said firmly one morning at breakfast, her determination mirrored in my grandfather's eyes. "But what about Mom and Dad? They don't think I'm ready," I mumbled, nervously fiddling with my cereal spoon, anxious about their reaction. "We'll handle your parents. You need education and socialization, not isolation," Grandpa declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. Later that day, they drove me home to confront my parents. The air was thick with tension as Grandpa knocked on the door. "Mike and Julia should have equal opportunities, and Julia has been kept in the dark for too long," he stated without hesitation as soon as my parents opened the door. "This is none of your business," my father shot back, his voice icy and dismissive. "It is our business when you neglect our granddaughter," my grandmother countered, her voice steady but laced with a fury I had never witnessed before. After much discussion and undeniable logic from my grandparents, my parents reluctantly agreed to enroll me in school. My first day was a whirlwind of excitement and terror. Clutching the straps of my backpack, I stepped into the classroom, feeling the weight of every gaze on me. "Why are you so weird-looking?" a boy sneered during recess. I tried to shrink away, but his words stung, echoing the disdain I'd always known at home. Despite the bullying, I found solace in the pages of books and in the numbers and equations that made sense when the chaos around me did not. But one day, the bullying escalated from cruel words to something far worse. Mike, who attended the same school, turned a blind eye as a group of older kids cornered me behind the gym. "Leave me alone," I screamed, my back pressed against the cold wall. "What are you going to do, freak?" the leader taunted, a cruel smirk twisting his face. I didn't plan it. But my hand swung out, clutching a textbook, and it connected squarely with his nose. Shocked by my own action, I ran home, tears streaming down my face, not pausing to see the blood or hear the cries behind me. When I burst through the front door, out of breath and terrified, my father stood there, his anger palpable. "You're causing trouble at school now. Can't you do anything right?" he shouted, advancing toward me. I was defending myself. I shot back, my own anger flaring up to meet his, fed up with being the victim. His hand was raised, but before it could descend, my mother seized his arm. "Stop, John. She's just a child. Stay out of this," he snapped at her. The brief hesitation gave me the chance I needed to slip away, darting for the safety of my grandparents' house. Once there, I relayed the events through sobs, my grandmother's arms wrapping around me, soothing yet fierce with resolve. "They can't keep treating you this way, Julia. It's not right," she whispered, her decision already forming. "We're going to do something about this once and for all," Grandpa declared, his jaw set with determination. "They promised to protect me, to fight for me, and as I fell asleep in my old, comforting bed, I dared to hope for the first time that life could be different, that I could be more than just the unwanted child." The morning after my return, Grandma and Grandpa were already on the phone, their voices filled with urgency and determination. They were speaking with a lawyer, a family friend. "They've gone too far this time. It's not just neglect, it's abuse," Grandpa argued, his hand clenched tightly around the receiver. Grandma paced back and forth, jotting down notes. "We need to file for emergency custody. Julia isn't safe there." The following weeks blurred into a whirlwind of meetings and legal documents. I learned terms like custody and guardianship, all while grappling with a mix of fear and relief. Fear of what my parents might do, and relief that someone was finally taking my side. At the custody hearing, my parents wore masks of concern, a stark contrast to their indifference at home. "We love our daughter and want what's best for her," my father told the judge, his voice dripping with feigned sincerity. "He's lying," I whispered to Grandma, gripping her hand tightly. The judge turned to me, his expression unreadable. "And what do you think is best for you, Julia?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "I want to stay with my grandparents. They care about me." A heavy silence fell over the room before the judge nodded slowly, making notes. "We'll consider your wishes, Julia." Days later, the judge granted temporary custody to my grandparents. My parents' facade cracked in the courtroom, their anger barely contained. "You're stealing our daughter," my mother hissed as they stormed out. "We're saving her," Grandpa retorted quietly, his arm protectively around my shoulders. Back at my grandparents' house, life began to change. I had my own room, painted a soothing light blue with white trimmings, a stark contrast to the dark, neglected space I had known at my parents' house. "Let's plant a new garden just for you," Grandma suggested one sunny morning. "You can choose whatever you want to plant." As we dug into the earth, sowing seeds for tomatoes, carrots, and sunflowers, I felt something inside me start to heal. The simple act of nurturing something and watching it grow became therapeutic. Afternoons were spent with Grandpa, who shared not only legal strategies but also chess strategies. "Life's a bit like chess, Julia. You need to think ahead and plan your moves," he'd say, tapping a finger on the board gently. "And what if something unexpected happens?" I asked one day as I moved my night. "Then you adapt, just like you're doing now," he smiled, his eyes sparkling with pride. Evenings were for baking with Grandma or watching old movies wrapped in blankets on the couch. Laughter became a common sound, and I started to feel like I belonged. As the final custody hearing approached, anxiety gnawed at me, but Grandma squeezed my hand, whispering, "No matter what happens, you're home now, Julia." In that moment, surrounded by the love and support of my grandparents, I finally understood what it meant to have a sanctuary. It wasn't just a place, it was where I could be myself, safe and cherished. I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing I wasn't alone anymore. The courthouse was quiet, almost solemn, as we awaited the judge's final decision. My heart raced with a mix of hope and nervousness. Grandma and Grandpa sat beside me, their presence reassuring. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. He reviewed his notes and then looked up, meeting my anxious gaze. After reviewing all the evidence and considering Julia's best interests, I grant permanent custody to her grandparents. A wave of relief washed over me, so strong it was almost palpable. Grandma squeezed my hand, tears of joy glistening in her eyes, while Grandpa nodded, his expression one of quiet triumph. Outside the courthouse, the air never tasted sweeter. "We did it, Julia. You're safe now," Grandma whispered, hugging me tightly. But they didn't stop there. "Grandpa, ever the strategist, had another move to make. It's time to secure your future completely, he said one evening, showing me documents for their will. My parents' names were conspicuously absent, replaced by mine. This is your inheritance now. We want you to have security, something they never gave you, he explained, signing the document with a steady hand. The finality of that act was not just legal, it was deeply symbolic. It clearly stated that my grandparents were my true family, the ones who genuinely cared for my welfare. With the custody battle behind us, I began to heal. Grandma found a therapist who specialized in family trauma, and I started sessions that spring. Talking about my feelings, something I'd never been able to do before, was both challenging and liberating. You're doing great, Julia, my therapist would say, her voice encouraging. It's okay to feel these emotions. It's part of healing. School became a haven too, free from the shadows of my past. My grades improved dramatically, and I discovered a love for science. The logical processes and discoveries mirrored my own journey of self-discovery and recovery. Look at this, Grandpa, I exclaimed, showing him my latest science project on plant growth. It's about how the right environment can dramatically influence growth. Just like you, Julia. You've grown so much, he replied, his voice thick with emotion, proud of every small victory I achieved. As the seasons changed, so did I. Each day brought new challenges, and with each challenge, I found new strength. But also new joys. I learned to play the piano, filling the house with music, something my old home had never known. Grandma and I would often sing along, our voices blending in harmony. Life was no longer about merely surviving each day, it was about living it fully. My grandparents' unwavering support was my foundation. Their love the walls that protected me, and their wisdom the roof that sheltered me from any storm. As we planted a new batch of sunflowers in the garden, Grandma smiled at me, a smile that spoke volumes. You've turned the tables, Julia. You've taken control of your story. As I watered the young plants, watching them reach towards the sun, I realized she was right. I had turned the tables, and for the first time in my life, I was not just surviving, I was thriving. Standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my dress for the evening celebration, I couldn't help but reflect on the long journey that had brought me here. From a neglected, unwanted child to a young woman surrounded by love and purpose, my transformation was almost unimaginable. Today wasn't just any birthday. It marked not only another year of life but the launch of my own foundation, the New Beginnings Child Advocacy Foundation. Using the inheritance that Grandma and Grandpa had secured for me, I established this foundation to support children who had suffered like I had, providing them with educational and legal resources to help them rebuild their lives. Julia, are you ready? Everyone's starting to arrive. Grandma called from downstairs, her voice filled with excitement. Coming down the stairs, I was greeted by a house full of friends, family, and supporters. All gathered to celebrate not just my birthday, but the new chapter I was embarking on. The room was adorned with balloons and banners, the laughter and chatter creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. As I mingled with the guests, I shared my vision for the foundation. With new beginnings, we can give children the support they need to heal and thrive. No child should ever feel alone or unloved, I explained passionately, my words drawing nods and expressions of encouragement. Julia, this is wonderful. You're making a real difference, said one of the guests, a local teacher, her eyes shining with admiration. Later in the evening, Grandpa stood up to make a toast. To Julia, who has shown us all the strength of her spirit and the depth of her heart, you have turned pain into purpose, and we are all so proud of you. Glasses clinked and a chorus of cheers filled the room. I felt my eyes welling with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. Grandma came over and wrapped her arm around me. Happy birthday, dear. This is just the beginning. As the night drew to a close, I looked around at the joyful faces, each one radiating genuine love and support. It was a stark contrast to the lonely, loveless birthdays of my childhood. Now, I was surrounded by a community that believed in me and the cause I was fighting for. Stepping out into the garden for a moment of quiet, I looked up at the stars. The night was peaceful, the air fresh with the promise of spring. I thought about all the children my foundation would help, the lives that could be transformed because someone cared. In that moment, I knew that every struggle I had faced was part of a larger journey. I had found my purpose, and I was exactly where I was meant to be. With a heart full of hope and a clear vision for the future, I was ready to change the world, one child at a time. Turning back to join the party, I carried with me a sense of peace. This was more than a new beginning for me, it was a new hope for many others. As laughter and music filled the air, I celebrated not just my birthday, but the joy of new beginnings and the beauty of turning dreams into reality. The story of Julia's transformation has come to an end. What do you think is the most crucial support system for children facing neglect? Share your thoughts in the comments.